Canada doesn't have a lot of involvement in East Timor per se, but what is really important is Canada's involvement in Indonesia, which is the attacking nation. Canada has at least $1.4 billion invested in Indonesia, which makes it really unique. Canada is the largest Western investor there, just behind Japan and Hong Kong, and even ahead of the United States. We have more money, in fact, invested in Indonesia than we have anywhere else in the world except for the United States and Great Britain, which again is very strange. It's the one third world nation where we have real economic clout. Not only do we have really powerful investment there, which is mostly in the form of an Inco plant out in the jungle in Sulawesi, but we also have a trade surplus. Again, it's unique in the Pacific Rim. And we have a very big aid program, which is the largest non-Commonwealth program in the world. Canada has always made quite a lot of money off selling arms to kill Asians with. I mean, one of the little-known facts, I suppose, of Canada's military record is that the Vietnam War was a great boon to our military producers. We sold something like $2 billion worth of armaments to the Americans to kill the Vietnamese and other Indo-Chinese with. That, catapulted us right into the top 10 of world military producers. And in fact, every single university in Canada made money off contracts to the American Armed Forces during that war. Now, we've sort of continued in that tradition ever since. It's important to remember that when the Vietnamese War shut down in 1975, the one in East Timor started up. And ever since then, we've been giving arms to the Indonesians to carry on that war with. This is, in fact, a copy of the Canadian Defence Products Guide. It's paid for by our tax money, and it goes out to people like the Indonesians so that they can see what they can buy, again, to kill people whose countries they are invading. We don't always know about which weapons are being sold because the Canadian government doesn't always admit to them being for military use. And in fact, it's not publicly, there's no public documentation which is readily available to find out what we're selling. But one of the biggest single sales that we know about recently was in February 1987. 100 engines, which are twin turbocraft engines, the number is PT-63B, were sold. They are made by Pratt & Whitney in Montreal, and they're for use in Bell 412 helicopters. They were flown to Bandung in Indonesia. They were assembled on an Air Force base, and from there we assume they're going to be used in East Timor. Because they're slow-moving counterinsurgency aircraft, they're very good for use in a war against guerrillas.
Is the minister saying, Mr. Speaker, that he has received from the Foreign Minister of Indonesia and from our ambassador in Indonesia and other sources sufficient evidence that the military occupation of East Timor has come to an end and that the massive human rights violations have also come to an end?
In a word, Mr. Speaker, yes.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, that is not the evidence, as the Minister knows, that we have received from Amnesty International, which is a body that we usually rely upon. And particularly, if I may ask specifically, in my second question, about Canadian arms exports to Indonesia, which have been going on during the period of the military occupation of East Timor, and indeed to the tune of $2 million worth of military goods. Next month, the High-Tech 87 is encouraging further military exports to Indonesia. Will the Minister seriously look at the continuation of such exports in light of the reports that we have received from very reliable sources?
Mr. Speaker, I know the honourable member takes these matters seriously and would not want to engage in representations that would be misleading. She made reference to the export of military equipment. The military equipment in question is not arms. She made reference to the question of massive violations of human rights and asked if I was satisfied that those were not occurring. I am satisfied that there are not massive violations of human rights. There was very legitimate room for concern for a period of time with regard to the situation in East Timor. It is our information that that cause for concern has diminished considerably in recent years, and I would welcome the member to acquaint herself with the current facts in East Timor.
Now, what happened at the United Nations was that there were a number of votes which denounced the invasion and called for immediate withdrawal of Indonesian troops and recognition of the right of East Timor not to be molested. Now, what happened each time was that Canada abstained until 1979, when it started voting along with Indonesia to say that it was a fait accompli, there was really nothing wrong with the occupation, and that it was time to go on with what they called reconstruction. And this has been the line ever since of the Canadian government, that things are basically okay. There was a bad period at the beginning when there might have been a few little human rights violations and a few people killed, but basically things were fine. Now, this is a flat-out lie. The thing is that there has been a war going on ever since then. I mean, it's been 12 years now. It doesn't show any signs of stopping. Fretilin, the resistance is as strong as it ever was. But yet the Canadian government refuses to admit that, because to admit that would be to say that there is still a war going on, which is something that's insupportable.
Fretilin was created officially after the coup in Portugal in 1974, when the new regime in Portugal liberalized political life, allowing political activities to take place. Our goal was essentially to establish an independent East Timor. Never at one time in our political platform we inscribe any label, any ideological label to ourselves. We were simply a nationalist front, and we believed in improving the quality of life of the Timorese people. We start with by organizing literacy programs throughout the country, because in a country with more than 90% illiterate, in order to be able to mobilize the people to raise their political awareness, we had to give them some basic tools to understand what we wanted to do with an independent East Timor. So we mobilized Timorese students from high school and the technical schools to go to the countryside and set up literacy schools on the basis of the Paul Freire method. We also set up cooperative schemes throughout the country. We brought to many villages in the remote interior water projects, some housing projects, healthcare that they never had before. We believe that through these concrete projects we would win the allegiance, the support of the people, because we were not simply propagating empty ideas, but we are in fact working with them to bring solutions to their concrete problems. The Indonesians, they use massive firepower to try to crush Fretilin.
What areas of East Timor are they controlling now?
Oh, no. They do not control at all. Just 200 and disorganized. They have no organization at all. So of course, they do not control. You can go everywhere.
How can you explain all these Indonesian forces in East Timor just for 200 people?
We just waiting him in the villages to get them return home. We just only ask him to come to us. We send their family to come to us, and finally they come to us.
In the period of 77-79, because of massive Indonesian invasion offensive, with the increase in military supplies from the Western Wall, Indonesia basically almost defeated Fretilin militarily. But after a period of reorganization, Fretilin was able to emerge again by 1981. In 1982, Fretilin was able to relaunch its own military operations against the Indonesians. By 1983, Fretilin forced the Indonesians to come to the negotiation table. General Purwanto, the Indonesian military commander in East Timor, under instructions from the Indonesian Armed Forces Chief General Benny Murdani, sought talks with Fretilin. And why did they seek talks with Fretilin? Because the Indonesian army was realized that it was unable to defeat Fretilin militarily. So by 1983 onwards, Fretilin increased in its organizational capabilities. It had captured a big amount of weapons and was able to deploy in the field up to 200, 400 men in engagements with the Indonesians. Today, Fretilin has about 3,000 troops. They are fighting because their land has been taken away from them. They have been pushed away from the ancestral sacred lands in the mountains where they lived for thousands of years. And as long as this situation remains, and as long as foreigners occupy their land, be they Indonesians or whoever, they will continue to fight.
There are an estimated 60,000 Timorese living in the mountains free of Indonesian occupation. The Indonesians have cut off information about the resistance movement to the outside world. Letters and images such as these recent photos are occasionally smuggled out, proof of the guerrillas' continued resistance and strength. Diplomatically, Fretilin and the Union for a Democratic Timor, UDT, have formed a political coalition. Together, they are counting on international pressure to force the Indonesian military to withdraw from their country.
The United States, Canada, and so on have no particular interest in seeing the Timorese slaughtered. They simply don't care. What they care about is ensuring that Indonesia continues to fulfill its function as a source of resources, raw materials, opportunities for investment, markets, enabling in the first place, assisting in the recovery of Japan, now enriching the West. It's essentially, as far as Canada is concerned, it's essentially the same as Indochina. Canada had no particular interest in seeing several million people slaughtered in Indochina, but it did have an interest in profit, and therefore Canada became the largest per capita war exporter in the world during the Indochina War, enriching itself on the destruction of Indochina, while of course providing appropriate hypocritical moralizing about the evil of the American bombers and so on and so forth. That's standard and typical, and the East Timor situation is simply one case in point. So the silence of the West concerning East Timor is completely understandable. The reality is unpleasant, and therefore it's better not to know about it. And the ideological institutions perform their task very effectively. They keep us from knowing about it.
It's difficult to think of a world situation in which Canadian activism would have more punch than the Indonesian East Timor situation. Indonesia is extremely sensitive to world opinion, and particularly Canadian opinion. And this is a case where even the most simple letter writing, if that's all that people choose to do, would have a very powerful effect. People could write to their MPs, to the government, to CETA, to criticize aid programs which are badly being used. They can criticize military production. They can write to the Indonesian government itself. All these things would be quite powerful, and they're very easy to do. There are other things that they can do. People can, either individually or through groups they're already involved in, educate their local neighborhoods about East Timor and try to get other forms of activism started up. There is, in fact, a wide range of things that they could do, right up to nonviolent civil disobedience, for example, to possibly blockade the sale of military products to Indonesia, which is, I think, quite important because that's going up as well.